I'm going to call the Budget Committee meeting to order. We'll start with roll call. Druffel? Here. Glover? Not here. Hurt? Councilmember Hurt is somewhere on the premise. Mendez? Here. Pulley? Out. Roten? In the back. Councilmember Sledge? Here. Councilmember Suara? Here. Syracuse? Here. Toombs? Here. Van Rees? Not here, and Vercher not here. So I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9 when Hurt reappears. Okay, that is 8 constitutes a quorum. We're ready to begin. We'll begin with RS 2021-1201. Sponsor is Allen. This determines the issuance of general obligation bonds for Metro government in an aggregate principal amount of not to exceed $568,855,000. Do I have a motion? For purposes of discussion, it's been moved and seconded. I need to start with the substitute. That will just clear the way for much other discussion. Can I move that substitute myself? Thank you. Councilmember Mendez. The substitute would simply change the caption not to mention the amount that the bill, that this resolution will authorize. It is in the body of the bill, and it will be spelled out in the body of any of the amendments that we discuss. But by moving the substitute, then we open up the option to discuss further amendments that council members have. So with that, are there any other questions on this first substitute? Councilmember Mendez. You're recognized.
Thanks. I just wanted to get the process that we're going to employ tomorrow night just out on the table, just make sure there's a common understanding. One of the likely or possible impacts of all the amendments is that the total amount of bonds being approved may change between how it was originally drafted to at the end of tomorrow night. And right now, the number could be a whole bunch of things. We don't know what it'll end up being. And so I understand that tomorrow night, the substitute will be added first, so it'll just remove the total from the caption. Then we'll consider all the amendments. And then at the end of all the amendments being considered, if the total dollar amount has been changed, when you move approval of the substitute as amended, you're going to make some additional request for the council office to clean it up overnight to get the correct number in the body and in the exhibits. Is that right?
For the final, yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Good question. Any other questions on the substitute? All we're doing is changing the caption so that we've got the flexibility to talk about all the other amendments that are coming up. Councilmember Hurd, are you good on the substitute? Great. All right. Hearing no other questions on this substitute, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the substitute is on the table. We'll come back to it once we amend the heck out of it. So we have 2 housekeeping amendments. All right, let me make sure I'm doing this correctly. That was just to put the substitute on, correct. Amendment 1, thank you. Is there a second? I think I heard a second somewhere. Councilmember Mendez, you're recognized.
Thanks. Again, this is, I'll say it as a statement, and hopefully Hannah says yes. This is part of a package of housekeeping things that are meant to set the stage for the more substantive amendments. This one addresses the fact that in the original legislation, restoration and resiliency was listed as a big $45 million line item, and this breaks it out in Amendment 1, and importantly for my purposes at least, it mentions the Jefferson Street cap for $15 million. And so voting to add this amendment does not indicate support for, say, the Jefferson Street cap, because there's going to be a further amendment. Voting for this amendment is simply having the administration spelling out of the $45 million added onto the legislation before we get down to the more substantive amendments. Do I have that right?
That is correct. And this also includes the capital project itemization forms for several items that were not included. Hannah, is there anything else about this amendment we need to explain? Okay, are there other questions on Amendment 1? So Amendment 1 simply spells out in detail all the parts of that 45,000, breaks it down into 20,000, 5,000, and 15,000 for the East Bank and the Jefferson Street multimodal connector. We will have further discussion on those items. It also makes a change on the safety vision zero traffic calming. Okay, Councilmember Mendez, you're recognized again. I haven't even turned your mic off.
First of all, you were saying 1,000, you meant million.
I did mean million.
And then I guess there is a clarifying thing that is going to come up in connection with one of Councilman O'Connell's amendments I want to ask about. This amendment turns the safety vision zero traffic calming category from 5 million to 10 million. And then he's got an amendment later that would add another 7 million to that CIB project number. And I guess I want to confirm that if his gets added, the intent is for a total of 17 million in this project category at the end of the day.
I will have to defer to someone at Councilman, Mr. Jameson is nodding yes. And we'll review that again when we get to that amendment.
All right, thank you.
Good point. Any other discussion? Thank you. Okay, we are on Amendment 1. I see no further questions. All those in favor of Amendment 1, say aye. Any opposed to Amendment 1? Okay. So that is 9 in favor, 0 against. Recommending Amendment 1 for adoption. We together on that one. Okay, on to Amendment 2. Again, which is somewhat housekeeping. Anyone want to move that amendment? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. The explanation for Amendment 2, this adds capital project cost itemization form for the parks, zoo parking CIB number 18PR00025 to the existing collective Exhibit B. So that is simply fulfilling a request that this cost itemization form had not been included, and this includes it. Any questions on Amendment 2? Seeing none, all those in favor of Amendment 2, any opposed? Okay, Amendment 2 is recommended for approval. Okay, those are generally housekeeping amendments. Now we move to substantive amendments. Councilmember Bradford, you have 2. I think you want to move one of those 2. Is that correct? Oh, I should turn on your mic. You're recognized.
Correct. I believe I'll be moving number 3, but not number 4.
Okay.
Number 3 basically reduces the Wharf Park amount from 20 million to 14 million, and then the remaining 6 million is divided up into 4.5 million for a library in land acquisition in District 13. The rest I will leave up to Hannah to clarify where it goes. Now, I will add that I guess I should first move for or motion for the amendment.
Do we have a second? Actually, I need someone on the committee to make the motion. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Thank you. Continue.
So one of the things that's been, you're going to hear that this can't be done because it's not on the CIB until 2026. Well, my pushback is, there's items that have been on the CIB that didn't get put on until years after. So we really shouldn't be holding ourselves to this number when it's been shown in the past that the previous administrations, the previous councils don't adhere to it. Now, the reason that I feel that this is an urgent need is that this particular property that I've been working on with Mr. Webb from property is going to probably be available within the next 15 to 24 months. And so I don't want us to be in a situation where this property becomes available, but we don't have any money to purchase it and have to wait another year and then take the risk of this property going to somewhere else. This is a location that the library director Oliver toured with me and believes that it would make a perfect site due to its location and the fact that the existing structure could very easily be rehabbed, so there would be construction costs would be less. There would be no need to do any land prep because there's already a structure there. So it could very potentially be a lot cheaper than the original 35 or 36 million that's currently in the CIB for a library for this area. And it's going to be a great deal to help a very underserved community in our city. There's a lot of immigrant children, a lot of low-income families that could very well be served by a library. And District 13 has been overlooked for decades, and I believe it's time that this body and this administration, frankly, starts paying attention to this district and starts investing in this neighborhood like it has everywhere else. So with that, I ask my colleagues to approve this amendment.
Thank you, Councilmember Bradford. Ms. Zeitlin, you were referred to for clarification on technical issues.
So for the clarification on the third, on I guess the second item, so $4.5 million to the New Murfreesboro Road Bradley Parkway Branch Library. The $1.5 million would go to Office of Fleet Management Replacement and Additions. Do you want me to talk about the CIB?
Yes, please.
Okay. Now, the issue is that the New Murfreesboro Road Bradley Parkway Branch Library is not scheduled in the CIB to have any funding until fiscal year 2026. So it is not able to be funded in this fiscal year. It would require a CIB amendment or some change in a future CIB.
And that would be a mechanism that would make it being done. And this is what sets out the process between CIB and CSB. Is that a charter requirement?
Yes, yeah, it is a charter requirement.
Any further discussion on that? Mr. Jameson, I see a look on your Can you?
We're in total agreement with Ms. Zeitlin. We would recommend amending the CIB. It is just simply scheduled for FY26. I don't believe bond counsel is here, but if they were, I believe they would tell you we cannot authorize spending on an FY26 CIB entry.
Thank you. That's Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know I'm not on the committee, but since this amendment does target a project in my district, can I also just confirm, I mean, I voted in favor of trying to acquire 88 Hermitage last term. I know that did not go through. I think that it's unfortunate to be paying a higher price, but am I correct? We would not be able to complete that acquisition if we took away from the allocation here. Is that correct?
I think I will look to the administration to answer that question.
Who's that?
Trail is there.
We understand that is correct, but Mr.
Webb?
Mr. Webb is here with us.
Good evening. That is correct, yes.
Thank you for that clarification. Mr. O'Connell?
Yes, thank you. So bearing that in mind, I mean, we had a lot of good discussion about the nature of looking at preservation of the actual facility that exists at 88 Hermitage Avenue. But I think, again, I would have been happy to get this at the $11 million price, but I do think that it is in the best interest of the city to acquire this property. So I would encourage colleagues to retain this and vote against this amendment.
Thank you. Other discussions, comments, questions? Are we ready to vote? Okay, we're looking at Amendment 3, which reduces CIB allocation for 88 Hermitage acquisition by $6 million and adds $4.5 million to a project that technically we will need to change the CIB, which that process is in front of us, and also designates $1.5 million. That part can work. So that being said, all those in favor, I think perhaps we should raise hands on this one. All those in favor, raise your hand. Seeing none. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Abstaining? Thank you. I see 0 for, 7 against, 2 abstaining. Thank you for good discussion. Next is, we're not doing Amendment 4 because that's being taken up by other things. Amendment 5, would Council Members Mendez or Hurt like to move that amendment?
I'd like to move it with an explanation, please.
You recognized? Is there a second? Been moved and seconded. Councilmember Mendez.
Thank you. So this amendment, number 5, would remove from the CIB the $15 million of general obligation bond authority related to the Jefferson Street cap. By way of explanation, I would start by saying that this council has consistently demonstrated interest and support for an ongoing discussion about the Jefferson Street cap. We approved the project for the CIB in the transportation plan, a grant request. There is a lot of support in this room, including from me, for having ongoing public engagement. However, the community support is not there at this time for $15 million worth of final bond approval. I've got a couple questions about, I was hoping bond counsel was going to be here. Usually bond counsel is here for a $500 million bond issuance, but I guess they're not here.
Is bond counsel here? Are we issuing a bond? I don't believe we are issuing a bond.
They've been here for the initial resolution for $500 million worth of bonds. Well, then I guess I'll address it to the administration. I want to make sure I understand how the proposed follow-on ordinance that is on first reading interacts with this initial resolution. As I understand it, the way they would work together is the initial resolution would constitute full final approval for incurring general obligation bond debt, and then if the follow-on ordinance passed, it would essentially prohibit allocating the money, spending the money, absent further approval of the council. Am I understanding that right?
Mr. Jameson? Sorry.
That is correct. I guess just to sort of flesh out the intent behind the ordinance, there was concern about incrementalism and on large projects, council members having the concern that there hasn't been an up or down vote yet taken on should we do the project. Instead, you are greeted with, can we qualify for this federal grant that's available this month or state grant? And after you voted on a dozen similar items, then council members can very understandably feel locked in. And sort of the sentiment is, how could you possibly now vote 6 months later after having voted for all these resolutions? So the companion ordinance, I'll call it, that's on first reading would guarantee to council after the grants receipts are determined, we know what funding is available at federal and state and other sources. And after community meetings are concluded, the council would have that final up or down vote. Should we do this? And so that you're conducting a more knowing assessment. The very appropriate question is, how does that interplay with an initial authorization? Did check with bond counsel to make sure this doesn't upset that apple cart. Their response was essentially, because a capital spending plan doesn't commit you to spending, it just authorizes the spending. And there have been other instances where projects approved in a capital spending plan, for whatever reason, subsequent developments did not go through. We have seen, and the council has passed, deauthorization mechanisms. And so their consensus, and I apologize that they're not here, but their advice, and I believe Mr. Dietz's advice, was that companion ordinance would not upset that apple cart. Having said that, if there's any language to that ordinance, which is on first reading tomorrow, any changes or tweaks are more than welcome by the administration. We're just trying to make council members comfortable knowing that our intent here is to allow the conversation to continue about the Jefferson Street cap, but also allow council members to know that they're not locked in.
With all respect, Mr. Jameson, I asked a question that you answered in the first 3 words, and you've been given the pitch afterwards. What I was asking, which you've confirmed, is that the way the legislation worked together is that the resolution we got before us now would be final full authorization to incur the bond debt, and the follow-on legislation would just lock it up at financing if it got passed. and I appreciate that confirmation. I had some extensive back and forth with legal today trying to pin down that it's not the deal where it's not official, it's not final until further approval. The fact of the matter is, this would approve bond spending, and it would just, if bonds were issued or the commercial paper program were hit, the follow-on legislation would just lock the money up in finance pending further council approval. This process, to my knowledge, this idea of somehow turning final approval for issuance of long-term bond debt in an initial authorizing resolution being made non-final with a follow-on piece of legislation passed later, I think is something that is being invented now, or do we have previous examples of something like this happening?
I'm not aware of any previous episode.
All right. So I'll wrap up my comments, Chair. The community meetings that have happened that I've attended have had a fairly negative community reaction from people who appear to live and work in the community immediately surrounding the Jefferson Street cap. All the letters we got indicated a desire from a variety of elected officials, all said, let's have further conversation. I don't recall that any of them said, go ahead and give final authorization for $15 million worth of bond debt. I am in favor of ongoing community engagement. This council has voted for talking about this, planning for this, having community meetings about this multiple times, and we should do that. But the idea that we would approve $15 million worth of bond debt in connection with this project at this time with this level of community support, when the community meetings had to be canceled and there's regrouping going on about how to go about it, it's simply premature. And I would ask that this amendment be passed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sledge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a couple of questions of the administration kind of based on this discussion about authorization versus deauthorization, and it's really about timeline. This is, I think, what we've been told in the past is we need to pass this in order to be continue to be competitive for a very specific federal funding grant that passed with the infrastructure bill. I guess what I'd ask the administration is timeline-wise. So in the time since we discussed this last, that infrastructure bill passed, right? So there's $1 billion to this reconnecting communities, of which about 75% can go to capital, I believe, 25% goes to planning. So talk us through, if you don't mind, let's say we approve this tonight, what's the next step for the administration to take these steps for competitiveness? And I will just add that on, and I'm sorry, Mr. Masmo, to ask a 7-part question, but kind of when will we know if we're competitive or not? Because I think that gets to the sort of deauthorization question that was addressed earlier. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to try to remember all 7 of those questions.
I won't, so don't worry about it.
Okay. So question number 1, you were really asking generally about timing. Very opportune question because I just earlier today was on a call with the administration about, not our administration, the Biden administration, USDOT office. They're hosting a series of events for us right now for major metro areas around how to be competitive and when the funding cycles are going to be coming forward and so forth, because the Reconnecting Communities grant is a new one. And we're expecting that to be coming out around May. So sometime it's a little past, the infra grants, which were on a March cycle, will still be on a March cycle, but we're aimed towards the Reconnecting Communities, and it looks like they'll be around May, maybe June. But they are promulgating all the regulatory requirements and all that sort of thing now, and they're also offering us all guidance and training, and that was part of what today was about. So
in that guidance and training, did they give an indication of, let's say you apply by May, the viability of your application by a certain date, time frame, whatever it might be?
Well, the viability of your application is actually assessed at the time of submission. So it's not like a later, in terms of a funding award, if that's kind of what you're referring to. Mm-hmm. Typically, those things are running on about 6-month cycle, although one of the things that they are trying to do is to push this infrastructure bill funding out very, quickly, so that it's getting into the hands of folks and projects are getting done. But this project is one that's already well known to the administration, and so they continue to follow our progress along the way.
Thank you. And I'd ask one more question, and it is to the fiscal portion of this. In keeping track with sort of what other communities who are applying for these grants, right, across the country, there have been price tags I have seen that would easily just eat up the entire amount, right? So I think the number that we were given as far as the total cost was something like 179 or 189 million. Can you talk a little bit to how the administration arrived at that number?
Absolutely. And just a quick correction, Councilmember, actually most of these caps aren't in the billion-dollar range, so take up the whole amount of money. It kind of depends, because a lot of communities across the country right now are looking at projects. Some are called stitches, so it's actually like a land bridge that goes across and nothing more than that. And then caps, which is more the sort of approach that we're taking, where you're creating something that actually is much more of a reconnection than just a land bridge would be. And on our case, the actual, when we did the transportation plan, we had done a preliminary estimate, and it was around the number that you've talked about. When we did the grant application, we worked with TDOT's construction office to revise that construction estimate against current bids, current price estimates, all those kinds of things that you would do, and we landed more around 120 million. The reason they're not as expensive as you think they might be is because a lot of the structure that the cap actually rests upon is existing structure. There's things that have to be strengthened, and there's other things that you could be doing. For example, with the Jefferson Street cap, we've talked about the intelligent transportation investments on the underside of the bridge to improve safety and so forth. But nonetheless, even at that, a cap of this size, we're just under 4 acres, 120 million is about right. And it's consistent too with a lot of the applications that are being developed around the country.
Got it. Thank you, ma'am, and thank
Sure
you, Chair.
thing.
I think that's helpful from our standpoint on a budget and finance standpoint. I do think this decision resides with the community that it impacts, obviously, and I know that we'll be talking about that at length as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Other Councilmember Sora.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Fay, my question is, in applying for this money, or when the administration is about to put the money there, is it based on commitment that the money is actually set aside, or is it just based on a plan to do that? Would that suffice?
What we did in the last grant application is we had some funds committed, just as we are talking about doing here. We're continuing to work the project through the necessary, for example, the environmental process that's a part of any of these federal grant applications. So the $15 million that's proposed here would enable us to continue to make progress in addition to the community development of this project, the community-led design, the community decision-making. And if that decision-making was favorably received, to continue in the environmental process, that's also an important part of this. What we did in the last grant application, you may recall, is we committed, there was a certain portion of the funding that we said it would be committed over multi-years. And I would expect that that would be the case with this one as well.
So let's say we did not put this money in here right now, and then we get an hint that we need to have the money available. Either you or Mr. Jameson, how long will it take us to put all of that together and make it happen?
Not sure I understand the question.
To find necessary funds to commit to it, other than through this
I think the
CSP.
question is, when we get to the application process and they say, oh, you need to have money committed, is there a mechanism at that point
At that
to have some
point.
money committed? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, thank you.
Not if it's taken out, I don't think.
Can you?
Not a CSP, correct?
The reason why I'm asking all of this is this. I think that the administration is selling it very well, why we need to set things aside, but I don't want us to ignore what the people in the area are saying. And sometimes we think we know what is best for an area. I think we need to listen to them as well. And so being able to set it aside and say, we hear you, you want some more conversation, let's have you talk about it, decide what you want us to do. I think it's crucial. But at the same time, we need to, I'm sure we can find money. I'm sure we have a way of making things happen. I'm sure CSP is not just once a year, as far as I know, unless I'm wrong. And so maybe there's a way to work that out. I just want to put that out there, that what I'm hearing from the people that live in there is that, and even the letters that we got, is that we need some more conversation. We all know the history of Jefferson Street. We all know what this area have suffered. So people are not eager to just say yes to anything federal because it could cost us more. That's the history. And so we need to listen to that, but let's make other plans so we don't lose it while we're trying to do that. That would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Suara. Again, I think the importance of the $15 million is to show that if we do get through the process with the community, which we agree with you is absolutely critically important, and we're prepared to participate in the grant cycles that are coming up here very soon, then it's going to be really important that we have that funding commitment there to enhance our competitiveness, as was evidenced, I think, in some of the explanation of the material that you got early today in the FAQs on the Jefferson Street cap.
Mr. Jameson? Thank you, Mr. Massimo.
Can I ask if I'm hearing the question correctly? In other words, why not drop this now and come back at a later capital spending plan, and in the meantime, gauge community support? Okay, I completely understand. So I think what Mr. Massimo would tell you is you need a plan to be eligible, but you need essentially the seed money to be competitive. Because once this $1 billion fund across the country was announced, you saw all the other cities that have dived into this, including some where the governors of the state have gone to DC. So we're in a race for a fixed amount of dollars. And so, and the grant process through the feds is not indefinite. So during that window of time, if we can show some level of interest, that is what makes us competitive compared to Portland, New York, Syracuse, all the other cities that are coming after this, that at the end of the day, this is a zero-sum game. But to hear the community is integral to this and absolutely vital to this. And if we build up available grant money and the community concludes this just isn't for us, that is completely understood. That has to control, and that is viable. But at the meantime, if they should decide they want this, we don't want to find out that they wanted it and we've lost grants funding that would have paid for it.
Thank you for that. Can I follow up with another question? Is there any risk to applying for the money, getting the grant, and then coming back and say, we've listened to the community, this is not what they want something else that doesn't necessarily fit within the requirements of this grant, so thank you very much, here's your money back. If we end up doing that, is that problematic in any way?
So I guess two angles to that. One, have we approved projects and then deauthorized them? Yes, we have. That is legally viable and done on, I won't say routinely, but once a year, I would say, on average. Whether or not Nashville develops a reputation for, oh, they applied for this and then they rejected it, we're not going to pay attention to them anymore. That is not my world. I don't know if Mr. Massimo has an opinion on that, but that may be what you're asking.
That is what I'm asking. Thank you.
That would not be a favorable thing. Cities that accept grant funds and then give them back, you will, in fact, we have a situation like that here with the AMP from years ago, where we still are overcoming. Steve Bland will tell you that's something we still have to overcome with the Federal Transit Administration, because that's their last experience with us on a major grant. So no, if the community decides that they did want the project and they decide what project they want and it fits in with the grant funding that is available, and we go for it, then we've got to be prepared to accept and implement with excellence.
And we think that part of the process could happen 6 months after the process begins in May. Am I doing the math right on that?
We would conclude the community process between now and when that grant application cycle is ready to go, and we would know whether we're applying for something the community wants or not, or we don't apply because the community doesn't want anything. We just wouldn't apply. And if we do apply, we're applying for something the community has said they want, and then we go for it, and we're successful with a grant application, and then we implement, like I said, with excellence.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. So what I'm hearing is a decision has to be made by May on how the community feels for that. That's kind of our drop date. That's helpful to me. Councilmember O'Connell and then Councilmember Hurt. I will call on committee members first. Thank you. Councilmember Hurt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is very difficult for me. I understand now why they say that a doctor should not be, that be the doctor of a family member, or why a relative should not represent, a lawyer should not represent a relative in court. You know, I think that I can't help but make this personal, and I've been advised not to, but I can't help it because I've given a quarter of a century of my life to Jefferson Street. If you don't know your history, you are doomed to repeat it. Now, I know that I should have, and actually I did strategize. I got 4 pages of single-spaced information that I can share. And I should ask questions and strategize and do all of those things. But that's not really who I am. Mr. Marcio just said that if we want to use the money for this, so I could ask the question, is this money for reconnecting communities only? Could it be used for environmental clean water? Could it be used for broadband? Could it be used for road safety? Could it be used for other things? And I'm sure they will tell you yes. But they are speaking about the cap. And no one from that community went to the administration and said, you know, I think we want a cap on Jefferson Street. I don't know how much time I have, but what I do want to tell you is that I worked on my thesis in 2010 at Belmont University, and I said at that time that I wanted to do something about redevelopment of community, so I chose Hope Gardens, a model of transformation from chaos to community, because I saw what had happened in South Nashville, the gentrification and what it had done. And I was vowed to work to make sure we did not gentrify North Nashville. Very, very hard. But let me give you some statistics, because I did not know that it had already been put in place. See, this that's happening right now, as he said, in Portland and all these other, he didn't mention Austin, Seattle, Charlotte, San Francisco, where they are making communities unaffordable for working people, for middle class, for people, for the constituents that we serve. In 2010, District 17 in South Nashville had a black population of 40%. In 2020, that's the white population, it has increased to 49%. In District 19 in 2010, the black population was 55%. In 2020, it was decreased by 27%. District 21, where the Jefferson Street cap is proposed, in 2010, the black population was 77%. In 2020, it's 52%. The white population in 2010 was 15%, and it was increased in 2020 to 35.3%. I had a friend to buy a house in 2012 on Meharry Boulevard for $13,000. She sold it in 2017 for $400,000. Bought a house in Clarksville, wants to come back because she hates it there.
She can't come back.
But guess what? She cannot afford to buy a house in that community. Almost nowhere in Nashville. So this is not just about creating a community, because when I tell you that the people that can afford the $600,000 to $900,000 homes that are over there on Jefferson Street, they're not going to Nashville General Hospital. They're not going to Fisk University or Tennessee State University. And they're not going to use the hospital for their health care, which means that the hospital is not going to be there, and those black students are not going to have their own training hospital, and it's going to make it more difficult. But you know where the growth has happened? In Murfreesboro. There's been 40% population growth in Murfreesboro and 25% growth in Clarksville. Brookings Institute said that if they want to, I'm sorry, but let me just say these two things.
Okay.
Brookings Institute said that if they want to correct a wrong with the Jefferson Street cap, it cannot happen. They need reparations in that community. So please understand, this is not necessarily about North Nashville and the black community, but it's about taking care of Nashville and making sure that we have affordable living for all people in Nashville.
Thank you, Councilmember Hurt. There is no question that is a huge need. There were some questions in there about other things this money could be used for. And Mr. Massimo, could you, if you remember that list, it was environmental. There were several things, if you remember that list, if you could
The
address
grant
that.
has to be used for transportation purposes, generally speaking.
Transportation.
Yes, ma'am. Transportation infrastructure. Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Is that only because you asked for Reconnect Communities?
That grant.
If we went for Reconnect Communities, which is the one that this would most appropriately fit under, it would be for transportation infrastructure.
Right, but that's because you asked for it. You could have asked for some other things, correct? Could you have asked for broadband or road safety?
There are other grants that we can pursue for exactly those kinds of things so that there's a holistic approach to the area. Yes, ma'am.
So that may be a further conversation to have. Thank you for that clarification. Good point. Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to make sure no other committee members are in the queue.
I haven't seen, is your hand up?
You
Thank
can
you.
return to Councilmember Mendez.
All right,
That's fine.
I'll come back to him after your. All right, Councilmember Mendez.
Thanks. I was just gonna, I'll keep it short. The logic we're getting from the administration has got, I mean, I'm being generous, circular babble to it. On the one hand, we hear that passing this legislation will be a funding commitment. On the other hand, we talk about the follow-on legislation will uncommit it. So it's subject to further approval later. On the one hand, we hear that the viability of competitiveness is measured at the time of application, yet clearly at the time of application, there's no commitment to the money because of the follow-on legislation. The starting point for this is that in the community meetings that are taking place, there is not currently community support for something beyond talking about it more. There's not community support for $15 million of final GO bond issuance authority. And this solution that's a first ever that anybody knows about of making a final CSP bond issuance approval final with some follow-on legislation 3 meetings from now, it doesn't make any sense about how on earth final bond issuance authority that becomes non-final 3 meetings from now is supposed to help with viability at the time of the application. There's a simple solution here. Councilmember Suarez said it. Get the community support and then issue the, pass something to support the spending once we have the community support. There should be an ongoing conversation. We have voted to support an ongoing conversation with the community a whole bunch of times, and it should keep going on. But this amendment respectfully should be passed.
Thank you. Councilmember Hurt, one more time, and then back to Councilmember O'Connell.
I'm sorry, I did say 2 things and I forgot. those letters of those individuals that was listed and indicated, because see, that says that work is continuously going on in support of submitting an application. I've been to all of the meetings, and I've not seen any of those individuals there. They have not seen or heard what the community has said about it. There was an article about by the Associated Press that gave you a clear picture of what has happened, and the community has said that they do not want the cap.
Thank you, Councilmember Hurt. Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a tough conversation for me for the same reasons that I think it is for Councilmember Hurt. I moved to Salem Town in 2007 in large part because we became a Meharry family that year. So I don't have the 2 full decades plus that Councilmember Hurt has in that community, but I'm going on 15 years and spent a lot of time over there. And as I was considering seeking this office, I did sit down with Rosetta Miller Perry, who is the publisher of the Tennessee Tribune, which just celebrated their 30th year of publication yesterday evening. And she asked me very pointedly, what are you going to do for Jefferson Street? And I said, I think there are some things that I've heard being in this community for the better part of a decade at that point, and certainly wanted to hear her priorities. And I'm not going to claim to represent the entire portion of Jefferson Street that this area represents, but I do represent Historic Buena Vista. I do represent Hope Gardens, and I do represent the businesses that are along Jefferson Street. And what I can tell you is it's true that there is not a consensus. I've been to these meetings. I have heard a lot of the concerns, but I've also heard plenty of people who are supportive of this. This did not just materialize overnight. This has been a conversation across several years, and in fact, I included the item in the capital improvements budget within a year of taking office because I thought this was a conversation worth having. And I'm honestly very pleased that the Cooper administration thought this was a worthy project. I think if we're going to talk about where our priorities are and how much community support, just look at this specific capital spending plan. We've allocated more than $100 million for a new high school in Bellevue. I can tell you that people I represent who live in the Pearl Cone cluster but were going to the old Hillwood High School, there are plenty of folks who came to community meetings and expressed concerns, but here we are building a new high school in Bellevue. There are disagreements all the time about priorities. There is disagreement about the assignment of capital, but I am astonished that we are sitting here saying, let's not invest in Jefferson Street in this way. Infrastructure wounded Jefferson Street. Infrastructure can, if we do a good job of it, heal. And I am interested in allowing that healing process to occur. And I would love to support a fully holistic approach to the corridor that is not just narrowly confined to the cap. I think we do want to look at affordable housing. I think we do want to look at ways that we can make that corridor a thriving home for the long-term future in terms of music venues, Black-owned businesses. I mean, all of the things that are in the picture and should be. But if we don't invest in that community with both local and federal dollars, we're shorting ourselves the opportunity to do that. Thank you, and I don't encourage colleagues to support this amendment.
Thank you. We will not have an endless debate. I will recognize you one more time, Councilmember Hurt, and then it may be time to vote. Thank you very much.
You know what? 50 Cent said that he was going to get it done. He was going to die trying. And so am I. And I'm so glad Councilmember O'Connor talked about Bellevue because I thought about using that too because I was there. I've been living in Bellevue for 25 years. I worked at Meharry Medical College 17 years before I started working at Jump. So when I say that I've given 40 plus years in that community, I have. But what went in Bellevue was a new library, a new community center, a new high school, not something that's going to make the community prettier. We need economic vitality. We need something that's going to make that community thrive. A community that has the highest poverty rate, the highest incarceration rate, and it also has a predominantly amount of African Americans who has a 13% literacy rate. So why aren't we talking about building a library over there? Why aren't we talking about building a training center to give people some jobs because they are unemployed or underemployed? Why aren't we talking about a repository for people to be able to go when there's some type of tragedy or catastrophe that takes place? So all of the things that we want to take place in that community, yes, I want redevelopment. Talked about it, did surveys year after year after year. I was very much a part of creating the redevelopment district for Jefferson Street. But do you know how many black residents or black developers have developed on Jefferson Street since that time? One. And he had a number of majority partners for them to do what it is that they did. So we want those things, yes. But we've had empty promises and no true commitments, and we deserve better than that. And if they were going to do it the right way, as Councilmember Suarez said, it would have been done first and said, this is what we want to do. Here's a community benefits agreement. This is what we'd like to do for the community. We'd like to do this, that, and the other. But that has not happened. And it has continuously been some insidious workings behind the scene trying to get done what the administration wants done. Please, colleagues, let's not do what we've always done. We've got to hold them accountable, and we do not need to vote for this money to go in the CSP. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Important topics. Seeing none, I think we're ready to vote. I believe this will require raising hands. We are voting on amendment, 5, right. Yeah, we are voting on amendment 5, which would reduce the maximum authorized aggregate principal amount of the general obligation bonds by $15 million by taking that out of the CIB ID project for Jefferson Street cap. All right, everybody understand the full discussion, what we're voting on? All those in favor of Amendment 5, signify by raising your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. Council member, was that a yes or a no? That was a no. Okay. So I saw 1, 2, can you raise your hands again? 1, 2, 3, 4. Councilmember Druffel, what'd you decide? Okay, so I see 5 in favor. All those opposed to Amendment 5, please raise your hand high. 1, 2, 3. We have 1 member not voting. So we recommend Amendment 5, 5 in favor, 3 against, 1 not voting. Good discussion. This is important stuff. Thank you. Woo, hopefully we'll move a little faster. Campbell is not on the committee. I saw 1 abstention over there. Toombs? I saw 5, 3, and 1. We have 9 present. That adds up to 9.
I saw 4.
Okay.
I saw 4, 3.
All right. Thank you. We stand corrected. The vote is 4, 3, and 2.
4, 3.
Indication of the complexity of that. Next is Amendment 6. Council members O'Connell and Johnston. Do we have a member of the committee who would like to move Amendment 6? Sorry. Are you ready to move on to Amendment 6? Yes. Yes.
No. I just say, sure you got that vote right? I thought I saw 5 hands. I thought I saw Sharon,
There
me,
were some
Kevin,
moving up and down.
Jeff, and Tom.
Councilmember
Had their hand.
Druffel lowered his hand.
He, at the very end, you asked him how he wanted to vote. He said yes.
No, he was a no. Thank you for checking. It was a little confusing. I appreciate that. The final count was 4, 3, 2. That's 9. Correct. That's correct. Thank you. Okay, now amendment number 6 by council members O'Connell and Johnston. Do you have a committee member who would like to move that amendment? Thank you, Councilmember Sledge. Second, been moved and seconded. Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As always, happy to defer to colleagues, but I wanted to give a little bit of context, if I may. Is that reasonable?
That would be helpful, please.
Okay. Thank you. So this amendment, I believe, and I'll ask the administration to confirm this, is friendly. This is an effort. We had a good and I think necessary conversation about how to do exactly what the conversation we were just talking about, which is to look at this holistically and say, all right, we know that there is, I think all council members at this point have had an opportunity to go look at the zoo, its extraordinary status in terms of its growth, its needs in terms of accommodating that growth, but also to recognize that it doesn't exist in a vacuum, that it exists along Nolensville and as a corridor, which is a spectacularly unsafe corridor. So pleased to look at this in terms of not just now looking at $15 million being allocated to private parking by itself, but instead to increase an allocation for Vision Zero with a good chunk of that going specifically to safety audit projects along the Nolensville corridor, as well as adding to WEGO's capital allocation to allow them to leverage a considerable amount. Again, looking at what is happening at the federal level on infrastructure, this should enable the use of a lot more of what we're seeing in terms of like the North Nashville Transit Center, potential Sobro Transit Hub, and other locations where we can actually build these as community connectors. And so pleased to have partnered with the administration, with NDOT, with WEGO, and appreciate Councilmember Johnson's support and would encourage the committee and colleagues to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Councilmember Sledge, who's on the committee, and then Councilmember Johnson.
Actually, can Councilmember Johnson go first since she's on it? I don't want to jump in.
Okay, sure. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you for recognizing me. I want to speak in support of this, and I appreciate the work that's been done from Councilman O'Connell. We started off in a place that took away a very important allocation to our zoo, and I think that ongoing conversations and education have shown us the importance of that allocation. We all value the zoo and what they do for our community and for here singularly for Davidson County, but also at large for the Middle Tennessee area. This is a parks allocation, the $15 million to the zoo. It's on parks property. It's an asset to the city that is actually, yes, we are committing $15 million to it, but well over $15 million in private funding will be committed in addition. So it unlocks that, and it also unlocks the expansion of the zoo. We currently don't even use, I think we're right at about 50% of the acreage that the zoo actually has versus what's actually developed. And so I'm looking forward to the expansion. I'm looking forward to this. And again, I want to say thank you to Councilman O'Connell for finding an excellent compromise and further investing into the safety of the Nolensville corridor.
Thank you. Councilmember Sledge.
I've got a couple questions of the administration. Going through the resolution, so portion 2 that refers to the neighborhood transit centers, can somebody give a little detail on where in particular that transit center goes? Or transit centers?
Mr. Jameson?
Mr. Massimo has left, but I believe. Oh, Steve Bland is here with us.
Mr. Bland,
I'm
can
sorry.
you address that, please?
Thank you. And Councilman Sledge, response to the question. Right now we have 2 centers in active development. Councilman O'Connell alluded to North Nashville, which is in design. Hillsborough is under construction now. Conceptually, in our plans, there would be 10 to 12. And what this funding would allow is sort of what we'll call the front end work. When you heard Ms. DeMassimo talking about the cap, a lot of the upfront to leverage federal funds requires environmental review, community engagement, real estate appraisal processes, that type of thing. So the goal of this would be actually to move, frankly, as many forward as we can, and then use the opportunities that the federal level presents to leverage more funding. Centers in active development now, when I say active development, they're areas where we've actually talked to real estate folks. We've done, we've talked to council members. A couple specifically is up in Madison. We're talking with Council Lady Van Rees about a potential center there. Down where the Global Mall redevelopment is with Councilmember Stiles, trying to do something down there. You heard Councilman O'Connell allude to the Sobro Transit Hub, which is included in the Metro Nashville Transportation Plan. And Councilman Syracuse, we've been working with on a kind of a repurposing of the Donaldson Station into more of a neighborhood transit center. And frankly, other opportunities pop up. North Nashville just kind of came up, an ideal site came up at the right time. So what this would allow us to do is move quickly as opportunities present themselves and put projects in a position to be more competitive for federal money. So a lot of what's intended here is environmental planning, design, real estate process with an idea that we would leverage state and federal funds to handle most of the construction costs. And that's essentially what we were able to do on North Nashville. The upfront Metro funding allowed us to secure the property, get design, get environmental done, and we were able to get about $6 million in State Improve Act funding, largely toward construction.
Thank you, Director. I'm a little concerned that the words Knowlesville Pike were said in that. Can I ask you if there is a neighborhood transit center in development or in thought about in Knowlesville Pike?
We just did a significant project along Nolensville Pike, upgrading 18 stations. We're still working with the city and with the Fair Board on trying to redo the stations adjacent to the fairgrounds as the fairgrounds redevelops. There's not a specific site identified. Really where we're looking at for those centers is where we have multiple routes intersecting. One of the big stations we did was down at the Walmart near Harding Place, so upgrading that station was one. So there's not a specific site that we're looking at in the Nolensville Pike corridor. Doesn't mean that something might not materialize. Fairgrounds is a good example where we have routes crossing the Nolensville Pike route and the Midtown route in that location. If we're able to find the right, a lot of this, frankly, like everything in Nashville at this point, depends on real estate and the availability of real estate.
Sure, and thank you, Drake. So I might move to the third piece then, as we talked about safety and Vision Zero traffic calming, because the intersection you just mentioned, Harding and Welshwood, is still on the dangerous list, the list of most dangerous intersections. So I don't know that it's for you, Director Blaine. It may be for Ms. DeMassimo, but where in this $7.2 million exhibit are we addressing issues regarding safety, Vision Zero, and traffic calming for Nolensville Pike?
Oh, Ms. DeMassimo, can you address a question about addressing safety, Vision Zero, traffic calming, and safer intersections with regard to the dangerous intersection at Nolensville Road and Harding?
There's a project that TDOT just recently, and we worked with them on it. They did a pedestrian safety audit, but it was also a traffic safety audit, but it was focused on pedestrians particularly along Nolensville Pike. There's $6.2 million worth of improvements that are needed there in order to make the corrections that have come out of that safety audit, and part of what's being suggested in the CSP and the project that I think you're discussing here now is to do exactly that.
So Ms. Massimo, thank you. I know you walked in as we were having the conversation. So our conversation context is the neighborhood transit centers piece that's in this amendment does not address Nolensville Pike at all. So where I'm speaking to, based on our previous conversation about this allocation, is ensuring that as much, my interest is as much money as this as possible goes toward Nolensville Pike issues. How can we do that in this $7.2 million, given you just mentioned there's 6.2 in safety issues that have been identified?
So, and this is for the transit centers?
Yeah, no, ma'am, it's in the same amendment.
It's in the same amendment.
Correct, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things that we're doing is working closely in terms of how the transit centers become an integral part of the overall safety improvements, and how obviously transit is not successful without pedestrian infrastructure. And without the right kind of transit centers to serve, the ridership that's there. And so we're working closely with WEGO to make sure that all that is integrated. We're working closely with TDOT because it's a TDOT facility to help facilitate these improvements. And like I said, this is coming directly out of the recommendations of a very detailed pedestrian road safety audit that was done. And that pedestrian piece encompasses the transit patrons and riders in that corridor.
Sure, I'm with you, and I know it was a little difficult because we were having part of that conversation before you came back in. I guess what I'm trying to get you to say, if you could say, is that of the 7.2 million that's in the safety/vision zero/traffic calming piece of this, that 6.2 million of it's going to go toward Knowlesville Pike safety issues that you just identified.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I apologize
okay.
for not understanding. That's correct. And the other million is going to be committed to one of the things that we're finding. Most unfortunately, one of the things as the NDOT director is you get the fatality reports, and they're every day. And one of the things that we see in those fatality reports is also speeding, reckless behavior, driving while impaired, driving distracted, no seat belts, things that are also a part of education and awareness. And we know that we can partner with the Governor's Office of Highway Safety, and as a part of all of these other sort of infrastructure improvements that we're making, that we also can do the things that are needed in education and awareness to begin to curb the behaviors that are also contributory factors.
And I assume those awareness efforts will be done in multiple languages?
Absolutely.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Director. I appreciate the detail.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Massimo, for catching up quickly. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Bland. Any other questions on this amendment? I guess at this point, I would like to ask Director Flannery, is there a hand I'm missing? I don't think so. Swart, did you have your hand up, Councilmember Swara? I'm sorry, I keep focusing. If I can ask you one question, and then I'll come back to Councilmember Swara. We've asked this question before. As we make our very thoughtful adjustments to this capital spending plan, can you just simply speak in very general terms to the effects of adding some amount of additional funding that is not included in this already?
Sure. And I have my colleague with me, Michelle Bosch, Metro Treasurer, who will keep me honest and hopefully add or amend anything I have to add here. I think it started probably last year before I got here. I think we have to take a moment and recognize where we've come. This council, the administration, specifically Councilmember Mendez, my predecessor, you guys did the lift and you did the tax increase. And so we have righted the financial ship. But the most important thing we have to do now is to maintain it, and how do we move forward? And part of that is affordability analysis. And that allows us to project revenues, expenses, how can we fund projects going forward? And we do that by looking at existing costs. What's our debt service right now? What is O&M costs? What kind of revenues can we expect? And then we looked at new projects. We have to think about the scenarios. What are the economic conditions? What will revenues look like? What will interest rates look like? We just talked about project timing. Is there delays? Is there accelerations? Have we met our fund balance requirements? And the metric this council relies on a lot is the percent of debt service as a percent of operating expenses. I think you've seen that number, the 14.5% to 15% range. We were at 13.6, I'm looking at Michelle, last year. As currently contemplated at the original number, we were going to be about 16.09. With this additional 10.5, we're still at 16.09. That's just not a material number. We're on the edge. The number can't get much bigger. 15 to 16 is kind of my comfort zone. I think it's a comfort level for you guys. I'm comfortable with 10.5, but anything beyond that, I think we have to have a conversation about.
Okay, that context is important. I appreciate you providing that. So just keep that in mind as we continue to do this good work. Councilmember Swara, did you have a question? Okay. All right. Any other questions on this amendment that would add funding to transit centers and Safety Vision Zero traffic calming? Seeing no other questions, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed? This is recommended 8 in favor, 0 against. Good discussion. Next is amendment number 7. Councilmember O'Connell, is this one that you would like for a committee member to move? Whoops. You're recognized.
Thank you. For the purposes of discussion, yes.
Okay. Councilmember Sledge, you moved this amendment. Thank you. Been moved and seconded. So Councilmember O'Connell, you're recognized.
Thank you. So Amendment 7 is, you all will notice, right, there's a First and Gay Park development for permanent supportive housing. The issue here is that the permanent supportive housing itself does not exist. As originally anticipated by this administration in 2019, we were any day now going to have a groundbreaking for permanent supportive housing. And that is now delayed until, as I understand it, spring or summer of 2022. We were originally anticipating moving dozens of people into this project right now. And I have a very, very difficult time allocating millions of dollars to beautify a development that people needed 2 years ago, needed 1 year ago, need right now, will need later this term when it is still not done. And I specifically included the main library, which is one of the gems of our whole cultural offering in the city, because it is an aging building. It needs capital urgently. And my feeling was that the park could wait a year. I'd rather see us start on the housing and clearly make progress on it than offer the park. I don't expect to offer this amendment on the floor, but I do think that colleagues need to be aware of the delays. It's been very, very difficult to get a full accounting of why we are 2.5 years behind on this project, and I would encourage the administration to do whatever they can to accelerate both its start and its completion. Thank you.
Thank you. So do you wish us to vote on this or just have the discussion?
I will leave that up to the committee.
Okay. Councilmember Sledge, you made the motion.
I was just being polite.
That was nice.
Maybe I'll ask this of the administration. So I'm going through the cost itemization form, and forgive me if I've missed this, but do we have a sketch of this park?
Do we have a what at this point?
Sketch of this park?
A sketch of this park? Is there?
Do we know what the First and Gay Park would look like?
Tim Nate, can you address that? We've got Tim Nate from Metro Parks.
There are some concepts of the park that were produced as part of the overall site development plans for the permanent supportive housing.
Got it.
So it's very, very conceptual at this point.
Okay. Who's produced those?
Do you know? Kimley Horn? It's Kim Hawkins. Okay. Kim Hawkins produced those. Okay. I think she was working with Kimley Horn on the Gobble Hayes. Yeah.
Gotcha. Is that under the current PSH funding we gave?
Sketches?
Yeah, the planning so far.
The planning has been under the, no, there's not under the PSH, no.
What's funding that planning right now?
That's under the previously CSP that was passed last February. We had 2.5 million of planning funds in it for public property.
Okay, so it was like an umbrella fund that's
Correct.
paid for. Okay.
Trail Webb from Metro
Thank you, Trail.
Finance. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I don't know. This isn't in the district I represent. I'll just point out one thing, I guess, and this will be a little soapboxy. You know, the amendment as it's written subs out and goes to the main library. And I will tell you from personal experience, I think all of our personal experience when we go to the main library, is right now the lack of permanent supportive housing, the library, the main library, in a lot of ways, is filling that hole. So we have asked the main library to shoulder a burden that's been put on them in part by the lack of permanent supportive housing. So I'll keep the motion out there. I don't know if anybody else wants to talk about it.
Valid point. Any other questions, comments? All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not voting. All right, I'm going to say 0 to 2, 5 not voting. Is that right? 6 not voting. Good discussion. Thank you. Amendment 8, Councilmember O'Connell and Welsh. Do we wish to move that one? We're not moving that one. Scratch Amendment 8. Making progress. Next is Amendment 9. Councilmember Taylor. Councilmember Taylor. Okay, it is not being offered. Thank you. That's good. There was an amendment 9 or 10. I have 10 written down here. Okay, great. So that amendment by Councilmember Taylor was Amendment 9, and we are not offering it. That gets us to the end of all the amendments that we wanted to consider. So the ones that we recommended were Amendments 1 and 2 were housekeeping. Amendment 4, good discussion on the Jefferson Street cap. That was to remove that funding. Amendment 8 was to add funding for Vision Zero. Amendment 6. Correct?
Recommended approval, and then Amendment 6 recommended approval.
Correct.
8 was not offered.
Correct. Amendment 6, we recommended 8 in favor. Sorry.
Sorry.
So the ones that we recommend approval on are 1, 2, 5, and 6.
1, 2,
Councilmember,
5, and no.
we voted
3 was
against
not
3, 0 to
recommended.
7. We voted on it, but we did not recommend approval.
Right.
All right, so I'm going to say it one more time. The amendments that we have recommended approval on are 1, 2, 5, and 6. So we are now voting on the substitute with amendments 1, 2, 5, and 6 for our recommendation. Is that clear as mud? Okay. It's been a lot of important stuff to discuss. So all those in favor of the substitute as amended with 4 amendments indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? All right, I will say we are down to, we still have 8 of us?
1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. I've got
Okay.
7.
And as discussed, we will ask, well, depending on where this goes tomorrow, we will ask the administration to finalize the numbers. Are we 8? Okay, 8 in favor, 0 against.
I've got 7, but
Who'd we lose?
I think Rosen might be.
Okay, 7. 7 in favor, 0 against. Awesome, moving right along. Next is RS 2021-1204, sponsors Gamble Johnston, Allen Bradford, and Hauser. This appropriates $1.933 million in $1,933,000 in American Recovery Act plans to Metro Parks to be used for managing homeless encampments and renovation and repair at Brookmead Park. Understand? Do we have a motion on that one?
So moved.
Been moved and seconded. I understand there is a substitute. Councilmember Sledge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move my substitute.
Okay, substitute's been moved. Is there a second? Great, brief explanation.
Brief explanation is that this would basically turn this legislation into legislation solely about Brookmead Park. What it would do is it would maintain the Section 3, which was the funding that explicitly talked about Brookmead Park. In Section 1, when we talked about equipment, it would maintain the trash trucks and the power washers, because those were things that were indicated by folks interested on every interest of Brookmead Park, for trash collection and cleanliness. And in Section 2, the only eye in the sky cameras it would fund is the 6 cameras at Brookmead Park. I'm on this legislation because I think that it is a decent enough compromise for everyone, and I think it's kind of the direction we should have started with just addressing Brookmead Park, and I'd ask committee members to support.
Thank you. Any other committee members wish to comment? Councilmember Mendez and then Johnston.
Thanks. I appreciate the work that folks put into this and Councilman Sledge's comments. I guess the only thing, and I'm gonna support this. I just want to say that to the extent we get more legislation down the road for more cameras in more parks, I think we're back to square one in the ongoing conversation. I'm willing to accept this as a compromise, but I want to guard against this being considered a precedent for radically increasing the cameras in parks. Thanks.
Councilmember Johnston.
Thank you for recognizing me. I appreciate the work that's gone into this as well. I think the original wording of this, the original resolution was unfortunate and inflammatory, and I appreciate that we have worked on that and gotten rid of that and have clarified what the true intent of these dollars is. I did want to see if there was anything in here. I read it and I just thought there could be some problems, so I wanted to see if Director Odom is here and wanted to speak to anything, any language that she sees that may be problematic, just to give her that opportunity if she would like to. Otherwise, I think I've co-sponsored this.
You are co-sponsored.
I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Odom.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for all of your hard work as we have moved through this process. Down in, I think one word that may be an issue down under Section 3. It reads, no funds allocated under this resolution shall be used for the purpose or effect of removing, inconveniencing, or otherwise disturbing residents from existing homeless encampments. I think the word inconveniencing, it could be interpreted in different ways. As everyone has stated throughout this debate or discussion about these particular funds, it is not the intention at all to remove folks from inhabited encampments. These encampments will be vacated and abandoned and not occupied. But in terms of inconveniencing, that word is a little bit troubling.
Can I get a lawyer on the administration perhaps to comment on where the word, or our counsel? You're recognized.
So
thank you, Director Odom.
yeah, this language was added by council amendment at the last meeting. I don't know that there was, I guess I'm not sure that there was a lot of intent behind the word inconveniencing to mean anything in particular other than just what I was going to say, unless a council member wants to speak to it.
All right, another lawyer, Councilmember Mendez.
Don't call me that. Well, I would note just a couple things. One, if we're picking at the words, there's not a lot of daylight between inconveniencing and otherwise disturbing. I think I gathered. Well, I thought the intent was clear when I read it. I guess I'm now questioning whether it was clear. When I read it, I assumed that removing was inadequate because removing would be the literal act of chasing people off or removing them physically, and that wasn't all that was being guarded against. What was being guarded against is generally harassing folks out of an area, and so you get to write generally harassing people out of an area or otherwise disturbing or inconveniencing. And I take the director's point that there's fuzziness there, but I think when I read it, at least the intent was, we're not just talking about you're not going to remove folks, you're not going to generally create circumstances that make them wish they were somewhere else. And I don't know how to say that any more specifically. I do take the point, and I think that's the nature sometime of compromises. So I'm not sure I've got a clear opinion other than to say I did think the intent was clear to limit something other than just physically removing folks.
Thank you for that. I would just ask if there is language there that will prevent Metro Parks from building a bridge and making the repairs that they need. This is directed at our council here.
The question was, would this
Would
make
the
it
language
so?
inconvenience make it so that we could not use the funding to build a bridge, for example, or the other items that are
No,
listed there?
I don't read it to prohibit that.
Okay, so if we can
Read it again.
perform
Yeah.
the actions that we've spelled out and understand that the spirit is to do so in a way that's respectful of people who we are going to be working very hard to find homes for at the same time. I think we've hopefully can move forward with that. We appreciate your
I'd just like to add and reassure that it is not our intention at all to harass or agitate people who are inhabiting these encampments, this encampment.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Councilmember Druffel.
Thank you, Chair. I think the intention here is just simply to do our best job to find homes first. But I don't think there's any intent, as I signed on to this bill, that we would do anything that would, do anything negative. So I think we're in good shape. At least that's our intent.
Thank you. And now we're on record as saying that too, which I think is helpful. Councilmember Gamble.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to also speak in support of the substitute here. I think the fact that it focuses just on the repairs of Brookmead Park allows for Metro Parks to come back to the ARP committee with a more comprehensive request for all parks in general, including staff, equipment, whatever is needed. And so that's why I'm in support of this amendment, because it speaks directly to the Brookmead Park issue. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Thank you so much, Director Odom. Seeing none, all those in favor of the substitute? Any opposed? I believe we're back up to 8. Is that correct? Yes. 8 in favor of the substitute. And on the bill as substituted. Do we have a motion? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of the resolution as substituted? Aye. Any opposed? All right, you recommend. Great. Next is RS 2021-1209, sponsors Toombs, Allen, and Withers. This authorizes the Director of Public Property Administration to purchase a parcel of property located at the 1354 Brick Church Pike and 0 Brick Church Pike. Do I have a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councilmember Toombs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hosted a community meeting on this land purchase and the relocation of the Juvenile Justice Center to this location last week. There is a lot of heated, some tense discussion amongst the community. There are a lot of neighbors who live adjacent to this property who are not on board yet. And there's some other community members in the surrounding community who do support it. And just for the viewing audience, and I know a lot of my constituents are going to be watching this, I want Mr. Webb to explain, I think there he is, where we are in this process, and that this is for the purchase of the property. It's not moving forward with the actual construction of the new Nashville Youth Campus for Empowerment, and that there's still going to be a lot more community engagement between now and then.
Thank you. Mr. Webb, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, this specific resolution will just authorize the purchase of the property, not the actual program. We still have, this is just for the acquisition, it's not for the actual construction of the building itself, just design work, so we can get to a point where we have more community engagement, actually have designs to review and renderings and those type of plan documents that can have a much more deep community engagement process with them throughout this process.
Thank you. And could council or the administration comment on if there will be other stages at which the Metro Council will need to vote?
For the additional funding for the construction.
For the additional funding for the construction. Okay, that's important to clarify. Councilmember Mendez.
Right, it'll be subject to capital spending plan, which will be final approval of incurring long-term bond debt, like it usually is, except for Jefferson recap, in which case it might not be because of possible future legislation later. But yeah, we'll get to vote on a future capital spending plan.
If we don't vote on it, it doesn't happen. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, Councilmember Toombs.
Another point as well, it may be necessary that property would need to be rezoned, and so that would be another opportunity for there to be community input through public hearing at planning and council.
Okay, thank you. That's important as well. Good clarifications. Okay, any other discussions, questions? Thank you, Mr. Webb. Seeing no other questions, we're ready to vote. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? You recommend. 8. 8 in favor, 0 against. Next is RS 2021-1259, sponsors Allen and Welsh. This approves an amendment to a grant from the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency to the Metro Department of Finance to provide public assistance pursuant to the Presidential Disaster Declaration for costs incurred for severe storms, tornadoes, straight-line winds, and flooding on March 3, 2020. I believe that this is our brief little spate, no it's not, of consent agenda, but when we get to that, we'll vote on several of them at once. This is not on the consent agenda. Do I have a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? You recommend, 8 in favor. Next is RS 2021-1260, sponsors Sepulveda, Johnston, Gamble, Allen, Welsh, Warren, Stiles. This appropriates $20,200,000 in American Rescue Plan Act funds to supplement the Barnes Fund, to establish a catalyst fund for affordable housing purchases, and to create a centralized database of subsidized housing. Do I have a motion? Been moved and seconded. I believe we have a substitute. Councilmember Sledge.
Yes, but in affordable housing, we deferred this one meeting without putting the substitute on, so I just asked the committee to defer one meeting, please.
Okay. It's been moved to defer one meeting and seconded. Any discussion on one meeting deferral? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? You recommend a one meeting deferral. Next is we're down to 7. Okay, so that was 7 in favor? 7 in favor, 0 against. Next is RS 2021-1261. Still not there. Sponsors Gamble, Sepulveda, Johnston, Allen, and Stiles. This appropriates $750,000 in American Rescue Plan Act funds to the Nashville Convention and Visitors Corporation to expand its sponsorship of new and culturally diverse events in Nashville. Do I have a motion? It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councilmember Mendez.
Thanks. I think I'm going to save most of my comments for one of the next couple ones, but these next few about the American Rescue Plan funds do leave me wondering, consistent with comments that Councilman Sledge made earlier about whether we're, and Councilman Member Suara and Councilmember Hurt, about whether we're deploying this federal money to solve real people's real problems quickly enough, as opposed to having sort of some wish list items on the budget that might not necessarily be to help real people quickly. And I think I'm going to support each of the next three in deference to our three council members that are on the American Rescue Plan committee, but I do find myself wondering whether these are the best use of the money. With that, I guess I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Since you've raised the question, I would appreciate Councilmember Gamble and other members, if you want, of that committee, just telling us your thought process. Councilmember Gamble.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councilmember Mendez, for bringing up that point. If you recall, the first funding that we received, the CARES Act funding, the priority was addressing the community needs first, and we did that. But in that, other than, I think it was $24 million, well, there was some funding that went to metro departments for pay and things like that. We did not really address our metro department needs other than our immediate response. So the, I guess the priority for these first allocations have been addressing our metro department needs. However, we are all understand and agree that we still have community needs and that we need to get to those community needs. So we are looking forward to our next meeting where we will be looking at I think Mary Jo just sent out our agenda, MDHA and other housing, other community needs that we have. But these are kind of carryover needs that we weren't able to address with the first round of funding that we're looking at addressing in this second round of funding. And as it relates to this resolution that we're looking at right now, 1261, there were a lot of community programs that were postponed or canceled last year because of the pandemic, and a lot of these community programs were held as fundraisers for those programs to continue, and they lost funding. So this is an opportunity to help rebuild those community programs that lost funding and weren't able to be served in the last year. So would appreciate your support on these, but definitely agree that we need to get to the community, back to the community support, and that is the objective of the committee.
Thank you. Councilmember Sepulveda.
Thank you, Chair, for recognizing me, even though I'm not on this committee. I have signed on to all of them except for one. I believe that's on later, a little bit later in the agenda. This one in particular, I signed on because they are events that are important for many minority communities that were at risk to not being held at some point. So I am in support of this. But I tend to agree with Councilmember Mendez. You know, in the beginning of this committee, the ARP committee, we are taking emergency needs first, and that's what we had planned. But now I think we're starting to get into the wish list, I would call it, category. And I have expressed this to the committee and other committee members that I would feel more comfortable once we have the survey from Hub Nashville, and Mary Jo did send that out on what those questions would look like for the community to be able to tell us what their priorities are on how to allocate the remainder of the funds. I think we've gotten a pretty good handle of some of these emergency needs. And I could only speak for myself. In that going forward in the committee, I would like to move forward after we have more community input. But in the meantime, I have signed on to all of them except for one, which I took as I'd feel more comfortable with community support and a community response for that one, but I could talk about that one later.
Thank you. Councilmember Hurt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too was going to wait until the other three to make my points, but since everyone is stating, I just thought maybe I should go ahead and throw it in. I know that there are going to be 2 installments of the money, and I want to make sure that we're going to be committed to ensure that we have neighborhood and residential losses. It's my understanding from the federal administration that this money was expected to go from the bottom up and not from the top down, and that CARES money did not reach a lot of the community small minority businesses that I know that had been intended, and that there were restrictions that were there that prevented them from being able to get it. I know there were several businesses on Jefferson Street that may have gotten 2 months or 3 months worth of PPP, thinking that that was all they were going to need. Is it PPP or PPE? You know, you get them mixed up. One of them's the equipment, PPP, yeah, so PPP. They got them and thought it was only going to be a 2 or 3 month thing, and it ended up being almost 2 years, and they basically was closed for a year, and they need to recover those losses. Also, I'd like to know in terms of the revenue replacement, because that's what it seems like is happening with the fleets and the HVAC, because some of these things I think were probably needed, and I guess they've been calling it the wish list, but wondering where they're going to get the monies. What spending categories are they going to be getting this money from is my concern. And what are they going to do? And this is a one-time funding that we have, and we want to make sure that we maximize and get the most out of it for everyone. And I just want to, you know, ask those particular things, and want to know if we have calculated the loss that we've received, that we've experienced from COVID. Is there a calculated lost amount?
think I'll recognize Ms. Wiggins. Thank you for those questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Specifically to the lost revenue calculation, it's defined by the U.S. Census Revenue Survey. And so when we take into account the way that the Treasury is requiring cities to calculate that, our first year of losses was $216 million. Now, that doesn't mean we take 216 of the 260 and we pocket it. It means that we have the ability to provide government services up to that 216 and charge those government services essentially to the fund. But it's not any government service. There are still some rules and regulations around that.
So that is like a revenue replacement.
So really the categories that we've been using have been our emergency public response. So we haven't been using our revenue replacement category. Things like, I've just got the list that's already been approved by the council in front of me. We did some mental health services. We did electronic health records for our health department, but cardiac monitors, showers, toilet trailers for some of our facilities and for training at the fire department. We had temporary staffing and grants related to our domestic and interpersonal violence for our Office of Family Safety. We did have some fleet that helps with our emergency response with OEM. We had $1 million for Public Emergency Response Fund, $3 million for rent, mortgage, and utility assistance. Social Services had $1.5 million for sheltering, expanding the SOAR program and landlord vouchers to help with affordable housing. So while some of these feel internal expenditures, they really are serving the public. And so that's been part of this first round. It's not the only priority. We have put, as you see, the affordable housing that came through. Now it was deferred this evening, but that was $20 million. That's by far the largest component that we've allocated from the committee or recommended from the committee. And just as Councilwoman Sepulveda said, we do continue to want to get the feedback from the nonprofits and hear where their greatest needs and wants are so that we direct those funds.
Councilmember Hurt.
Thank you. So the Equity Alliance did my fair share. I hope you all are still utilizing the information that came from that. And I also want to ask, how can we ensure with the next round that you are going to make sure that there is neighborhood and residential loss addressed in that distribution?
So if I may, I will share, and it's going to take me just a second to pull it up.
And give me a little bit more information about the nonprofits and what they need to do to get recovery.
So we are going to be putting a survey out on the hub, which is essentially asking for all of community input, not just nonprofits, but we have the guiding principles that we have looked at as a committee to say, make sure we're responding to, first and foremost, the pandemic. That's what, the primary use of the funds, and then how do we rebuild neighborhoods and, safety and community, and then also looking at how do we build our future going forward as a city. So when we look at some of the specifics of those guiding principles, we want the community to weigh in to say, are those the right priorities? Is that where we should be putting our funds? And we have different, very specific categories that they can rank and that they can weight and say, yes, maybe they rank it lower, then we know where community priorities are. We probably will not have a vast open, every nonprofit just apply for funds. We don't want to do a sprinkle method. We really want to look at what are the needs of the community and then have a focused application process for nonprofits that can serve in that area. For example, one of the first areas we're looking at is navigation. There are still a lot of resources out there. I'm not saying it's enough, I'm not saying it's too much, but a lot of the federal funds are there, and the biggest challenge right now are folks being able to access those funds. So we're looking for housing navigation, we're looking for healthcare navigation, we're looking for folks that can provide some of that case management to connect those in need with the funding and the programs that are there. So that's one of the priorities. And then we will continue to look at what are the other community needs and what nonprofits are doing that work that we can tap into, that we're not necessarily creating all new programs. I do want to share just our agenda for Wednesday, if anybody is interested, there are some community needs items on here. So again, we're looking at cure violence and community safety. We're looking at the Napier and Sedecum safety program. We're looking at more affordable housing with MDHA, and then also some other training with our mental health and mental health co-op that I talked about. So there are items that are happening every month that really are a combination of how Metro can serve the community. But we are not forgetting our nonprofit partners. We have just started. The council has approved $17.5 million in funding of 260. So we've just begun to really invest these dollars, and it was a little over, just under 40 million on tomorrow night's agenda. So if everything was passed, we would be at about 56 million. I sent that to council office today, but I'm happy to resend it so that everybody sees. We're just tracking by resolution and what the expense category is by the Treasury reporting so that you can see that. And I'll share it after every council meeting where something is approved.
Thank you, Ms. Wiggins. And also, if we can have that as an ongoing summary on the council budget and finance SharePoint. I mean, you've done a great job of providing us summaries along the way. And if that can sort of live and be updated where we can access it at any point, that would be very helpful, just so we can continue
So if I
to see
may,
the big
there is
picture.
a folder under budget, under the finance department reporting that says American Rescue Plan.
Gotcha.
And I will just add that report after every
Okay.
council meeting to that.
And would that show
section.
CARES Act funding as well?
It's just the American Rescue Plan.
Okay. It might be helpful, I mean, just, as we're trying to look at where has all this money gone from the beginning, if we could access that as well. Thank you.
I'll add
That's
that and just mark it as
awesome.
CRF. Okay.
Thank you so much. Good questions. Councilmember Swar.
It's not a question, but I want to ask Ms. Wiggins to, she had showed me something about 2 or 3 meetings ago of the non-for-profits that were actually utilized during the CARES Act funding. And I think that when we look at it, we talk about United Way, but when she actually showed the list of other non-for-profits that the money was eventually funneled to, you can see that it covers a whole lot of geographical area and different demographics in the city. I think those kind of information needs to be shared so that we know that as we're talking equity and making sure it's touching everyone, that people see that list. And I think if you can put that somewhere, I think I was very impressed by it. And I think that as the committee continue to do the work, those are the kind of things that we want to make sure that we're doing. So that would be good to share.
Thank you, Councilwoman. And I appreciate you bringing that up. And it goes back to what Councilwoman Hurt had mentioned. Those nonprofits were selected based on the Equity Alliance report. So when we identified the zip codes that were hardest hit by COVID, when we turned around and provide rent, mortgage, and utility assistance, just as we have in this round, while Metro Action Commission, and you heard from Dr. Kroom, has been amazing at getting significant dollars out the door, the limit for that was 80% of AMI. So if you remember, this council did approve some additional funding. But when we look at who's distributing those funds, we may contract with United Way, but they are selecting the nonprofit partners that are actually distributing those funds based on those zip codes of the Equity Alliance. And that's where we got over 40 nonprofit partners in really diverse neighborhoods, but also faith-based, and names that we do know, names that many of us have never heard of nonprofits, but because they were community-based and grassroots and a trusted organization for those neighborhoods.
Thank you. Any other questions on this one? Seeing none, all those in favor of RS 2021-1261, say aye. Any opposed? We'll be back up to 8. Okay. 8 in favor, 0 against. Next is RS 2021-1262, sponsors Sepulveda, Gamble, Johnston, Allen, and Stiles, appropriates $7,226,000 in American Rescue Plan Act funds to select Metro departments to upgrade various HVAC systems throughout the Metro government for improved ventilation. Do you have a motion? Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? I think we've discussed these in general. I see 2 more hands, Councilmember Swar and then Mendez.
I think my only question is, in the fiscal analysis, I see where there's a breakdown of the 7 million, but there's an additional 500,000 that was shown as expenses. So are we improving what we have? Because we already have in operating expenses on what we have already. So is the 500,000 additional operating expenses related to this additional HVACs? That was in the fiscal analysis that I just saw, and I just wasn't sure what that is supposed to be doing.
School 62. All right, okay, we have. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Velvet Hunter with General Services. And yes, that is in addition. Mostly it's consumables like filters for additional equipment, more expensive filters, those kinds of things.
So, but are we expecting that changing this HVAC will also reduce our maintenance costs and operation costs for what we have now, or there's no savings in that area?
Unfortunately, it won't reduce. We're actually adding some equipment, like some portable units, so it will have electricity costs. We're also adding parts like the UV lighting. Those will be bulbs that will have additional expenses that we didn't have before. I think though, we want it to be transparent, disclose these operating expenses, but we understand that ARP funding will not cover that, that it will be a part of the operating budgets of the various departments.
All right, I'm in support of it. I have no objection to it. I mean, that's part of what the fund is supposed to do, but just wanted to clarify what that is.
Thank you. Councilmember Mendez.
Thanks. I just made my comment brief on the last one because it was only $750,000. This one and the next one specifically total, I guess, 16 point something million dollars between the two of them. These are the ones that feel very much like we're getting a one-time sugar high into the Metro budget process. And I just, again, like I commented on the last one, this is not necessarily my conception. I understand the idea that this is 17 million out of 200, $250 million in the long run. But I would like to see us move to more people-centered things sooner rather than things outside Metro building, things outside physical assets owned by Metro sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnston.
Thank you. The point of prioritization is noted and taken very seriously. I think we're all ready to sort of move on to that. I do think when we were in our first situation where we were allocating CARES Act dollars, we were in a moment of triage. We were in an emergency. And we did hear from General Services. We heard from all of these departments, actually. But for this specific one, we heard from General Services, and they had a very compelling story about air quality, ventilation, all that. And at the time, I personally thought, we're going to be through this. We're going to get over this, and this is not going to be that big of a deal. We'll get a vaccine, and it's going to be fine. And so, but also we didn't have the money. It was a much smaller amount of money. It was only I say that tongue in cheek, it was only $121 million. I think we're going to be with this probably for the rest of our lives. And so having, this was a need before. Our ventilation systems throughout Metro are older and needing some updating. So I do feel like this was an important allocation to make at this time. To me, it's still sort of we're still a little bit in the triage situation from Metro's perspective. So from this resolution and the next one of needs that we've had for a long time, but those needs are exacerbated to the nth degree at this point because of COVID, because of the need of our healthy buildings, because of the need of our public safety officers with OEM and, the Sheriff's Department and NDOT and the Police Department to be able to serve our community in the capacity that are needed. But I do understand prioritizing and wanting to get these dollars back into the community where they need them. And I think that small business support and nonprofit support is very important to all of us. But we just needed to get a little bit through this triage. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that explanation. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Recommend approval, 8 in favor, 0 against. Next is RS 2021-1263, sponsors Gamble, Johnston, Allen, Bradford, and Stiles. This appropriates $9,069,614 in ARAP funds to General Services to expand the vehicle fleet of the Metro Nashville Police Department, Nashville Department of Transportation, and Davidson County Sheriff's Office. Do I have a motion? Been moved and seconded. Further discussion, Councilmember Mendez.
On this one, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess this is the one that Councilmember Sepulveda is not supporting, and I'm interested in hearing her perspective as a committee member.
Thank you. Councilmember Sepulveda.
Thank you. I had several concerns with this one particularly. You know, this really goes into what I had been talking about, wanting to see more community input and where the priorities of the community are. I know we're having a long discussion about what we want public safety to look like. And, you know, during the budget discussions, we heard from several community members who had specific concerns and wanted to see money go into different areas to address public safety. And, you know, I had agreed that the fire department needed the fleets because, you know, there are so many emergencies. They gave us data as to why it was important. The difference with the MMPD fleets were that it was to not have multiple officers in the same vehicle to try and reduce their exposure to COVID, which was a little bit different. And that is why I didn't support it and actually abstained from it, because I wanted to make sure that we were going down the route of community priorities. So I'd rather hold off on allocating for more fleets and more vehicles until we have more community input, and that's why I didn't vote for it.
Thank you. Councilmember Sledge?
So the main expenditure here seems to be 128 marked pursuit SUVs. Can we get a little more info on what type of vehicle that is? Make and model?
Would someone from admin or from MNPD want to answer that one? Or general services?
Yeah, so there are the marked pursuit vehicles now are actually SUVs, not cars. So that's exactly what it is. It's just it's just those SUVs. They're hybrid SUVs that the police department uses now for pursuit.
The model?
Yeah, it is it's a, what year?
It'd be 22s.
22, and it's a
Ford.
Interceptor, Ford Interceptors.
Okay. I'm a little concerned we're putting 128. Well, let me ask this. I want to assume, are these replacing or adding to the fleet?
They are adding to the fleet.
Okay. I'm going to move to defer this one meeting.
Okay, I see someone from MNPD and also Councilmember Gamble. Do you have anything else to add about what those extra vehicles would be used for? If it's just to put people in two cars, or if there's other use for that?
That is Sebastian Gordine, Deputy Chief, Support Service Bureau. It's right now what we're currently operating on is officers operating at 8.5-hour shifts. What we're looking to do is to move to four 10-hour shifts. So basically what that means is we'll have more officers out there patrolling the streets, answering calls for service, which is also going to require us to have more vehicles. And what we're looking at from the day shift to the evening shift, looking at about an hour and a half, we'll have actually more officers on the street, double officers that we have right now. But the big help for us and for the city will be from the evening shift to the midnight shift. We'll be looking at about 4.5 hours. We'll actually have more officers on the streets, and that's what we're showing where our highest call for service are at.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Sledge, and then Councilmember
Just a
Gamble.
clarifying to that, and thank you for that information.
Thank you.
Are you saying that y'all are going to be moving from 5-day 8.5-hour shifts to 4-day 10-hour shifts?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I've learned a lot from this. That's a major change. That's really big as far as like how we talk about. Man, my mind was just blown. Like how we talk about metro labor overall. So I'm sticking by my 1 million deferral request because encapsulated in this is touching on a ton of policy issues, right? We're talking now labor. What I really was going to talk about was the fact that we're putting 128 SUVs that are at least somewhat fuel using, and how does that impact our Green New Deal, our local Green New Deal work? We're putting 128 SUVs
I
on the
believe
street.
they did say hybrid, I believe.
Well, that's right, but they use some fuel, and also we're putting 120 SUVs. How does that work toward the Vision Zero stuff we just talked about pedestrian safety and interaction? And then, so I would love just a little bit of time to process this and get a little bit more information on this. So, like I said, I'm sticking by my 1 meeting deferral. I want to learn more about this.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Gamble.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to add, and maybe Commander, I was going to say Commander Gordine, because he was my commander over at Madison Precinct, could speak about what we heard at the ARP committee when we discussed this and had someone from MMPD come and talk, that not only would this allow more social distancing, but also currently you're using one fleet of cars for 2 shifts. So those cars are not ever sitting. They are being used 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's more wear and tear on those vehicles. I've seen for myself, having gone to a community meeting where a community engagement officer attended, and when we were ready to leave, the car wouldn't start. It's that old that he had to have a jump in order to start the car. And I started to take a picture of it because it was a great poster for why we need more fleet. So that is why I supported this legislation. It is not just a case of social distancing. It is a case that there has been a need for more fleet for our current existing MMPD staffing, and this would provide an opportunity to address that.
Thank you. Commander?
Yes, she basically touched on all the topics. Another issue that she didn't bring up was the fact that right now, when we do have shift change right now, we actually have officers sitting there waiting for other officers to end their shift, end their reports, come back to the precinct. Then, of course, they have to change out cars. All the while, we still have calls coming in, calls pending, and citizens out there needing a police response, and police are sitting at the precinct waiting on vehicles.
Thank you. So I appreciate the explanation for that. Thank you so much. Councilmember Mendez.
I guess I'm going to speak in support of the motion to defer. I mean, respectfully, I appreciate the forthright answers from the department. It doesn't sound terribly COVID related. It sounds like we're wanting to change how policing happens, and we need 128 more cars to do that. We just got done with a $500 and whatever million capital spending plan that we added $10 million to for a council member. Like this is a capital need and should go through that process. But you know, this is all stuff we're learning right now, late into a meeting. So I think deferral to talk about it more makes sense.
Thank you. Anyone else on the deferral? So it's been moved for a 1 meeting deferral. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? You recommend deferral. 8 in favor, 0 against. Next is RS 2021-1264, Johnson, Sepulveda, Gamble, Allen, and Stiles. This appropriates $2.38,648,000 in ARAP funds to general services to temporarily expand the trash disposal fleet of Metro Water Services to ensure timely trash collection and avoid public health issues. Been moved and seconded. Councilmember Johnston.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. Honeysucker to come to the podium and explain the need, please.
Mr. Honeysucker.
Good evening. Thank you all. John Honeysucker, Assistant Director of Waste Services. This right here is upon us taking over this assignment, being transferred over to Metro Water, there was a great need for some the fleet. What I'd like to do right now, I'd like to just give you a brief overview of our current status. And let me just add, General Services and their team have been doing a great job of trying to facilitate getting the fleet up to where it needs to be. But unfortunately, there is just a substantial need right now. Just to break down on what we are currently operating within Waste Services, front loaders. This municipality has 10. We have 10 front loaders that assigned us. Currently, we have one that is Metro-owned that is in operation right now. We are renting 4 of them right now that to come in and help assist us with the current need, ongoing need that is taking place right now. Rear loaders, the 18-yard rear loaders, we have 33 assigned. 11 of those are in service. That is putting us at 33% operational readiness. We have 5 8-yard rear loaders assigned us. 2 of those are in service. That's putting us at 40% operational readiness. Side loaders, which affects your recycle, which I just want to note, we're trying to go to every other week recycling in February of next year. Our side loaders, we have 25 assigned. 12 of them are in service. That puts us at a 48% readiness. We have 8 6-yard side loaders. 4 of those are in service. That puts us at a 50% operational readiness. Our roll-offs consist of working at the recycle centers. You have 10 of those located throughout the city. Then you have 4 convenience centers that utilize those. We have 11 of those assigned to us. 5 of those are currently, as of today, 5 are in service. That puts us at a 45% operational readiness. Now, I might add, with us having this right here, this situation going on, it is so important that we maintain those centers and those recycle locations operating on a day-to-day basis. Because what the trickle effect of that would be, if those were down or we have to limit the operational hours, that will then affect the safety and also increase illegal dumping throughout the cities, which will put a burden on other departments such as NDOT to have to go around and pick up trash from illegal dumping. And as you all know, the council is getting inundated right now with calls over illegal dumping within your districts. So we're putting forth a valid effort to make sure that we keep the department in an operational readiness situation. Also, with that, one of the things that our Director Potter, stands firm is making sure that the equipment is operationally safe for the employees. With the work that General Services is doing, and I think they can speak on that, not able to get the parts, and this is just not here. This is a nationwide situation, and they are doing the best they can right now to try to facilitate getting the equipment up and running as efficiently and as effectively as it can.
Thank you, Mr. Honeysucker. Any other questions? Appreciate that. Councilmember Hurt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't really have a question, but I do have a comment because this doesn't sound very much COVID related either. And it really concerns me with the situation we have ongoing with Red River. I do think and know that we need some improvement to our fleet. But should there be some type of investigation in terms of how did we get to this particular point in all of this? When we talk about we're only 45% operational ready, we depended very heavily on Red River, and the problem that we've been having with trash collections has been, long term, almost a year. And it just seems to me that we should have had more urgent and more attention given to this. And it's quite a bit for Mr. Honeysucker to try to come in, but it looks like he's fixing problems that existed before this became his responsibility.
Duly noted. Can you speak to the supply chain issue, Mr. Honeysucker, and also respond to Councilmember Hurt's comments?
I'm going to, in regards to the supply chain, I'll let Ms. Hunt speak on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of bring up that Mr. Honeysucker is exactly right, about we look at it every day and about half of the trash trucks are in for service right now. So due to the supply chain issue, we think that will be a temporary solution. And so this rental that's before you is just to get us through this temporary situation. We've got 9 new trucks on order from previous capital spending plan authorization. And with the approval of the spending plan tomorrow, hopefully, we'll have 10 more trash trucks. So this will just get us through this temporary supply chain issue.
Thank you. I think that does tie it to what we're concerned about. Councilmember Sepulveda and then Johnston.
Thank you. I do think it's important for the committee to note that it was stated that if we need to end the contract beforehand, that we have the opportunity to do so.
That's correct.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnston.
And correct me if I'm wrong, these trucks are Metro Water Services trucks. They're not Red River trucks. I know that we sometimes, or what used to be, I guess, Public Works, I know that we supplement sometimes to help them out when they're having their fleet issues or whatever, but these are our trucks. This really doesn't have anything to do with the challenges that we're experiencing with Red River, correct?
The numbers that Mr. Honeysucker shared are Metro-owned vehicles that are in the shop, and he's right. It's about, as of today, we check every day, as today, it was about half of them.
Thank you. Councilmember Syracuse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as I read the exhibit, this is a $2.4 million contract for 6 months. So is there any thought that you might be coming back in 6 months?
With full transparency, Councilman, there's a possibility that that would be the case. And I do want to make note, the Red River situation and this particular situation are two separate entities. Red River did file a bankruptcy, and that's totally separate. They're on the contract with the city. So, and just to note, we are looking at options with that. We are working diligently right now to put a backup plan in place. So in case something, hopefully it's not devastatingly pops up, we'll be able to address that and continue operation as normal.
Councilmember Syracuse.
So if it's 6 months, can you explain a little bit about 6 months? Why not 12 months? Are you just trying to have an incremental data-driven decision-making by only doing 6 instead of 12 or 18 or what?
Well, I wanted to make sure that we didn't expand out to 12 months to give fleet. I wanted to give general services a chance to look at it. And we were really looking at the situation with the parts, and that we felt that was a reasonable amount of time to give them a chance to see if we can get things caught up. But we wanted to do it in increments. And if we see that we're not going to be able to do that, I will be coming back to the council, and that's why we've committed to making sure you all are updated actually monthly at council meetings, at our committee meetings, to know exactly what's going on within the division.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Chair.
you. Mr. Potter, do you want to add anything to that? You're just there at the ready if we need us. Okay. Okay, he's doing good. Councilmember Hurt, and then Suara.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have a question. If there is an alternative plan that has to go into effect, will there be a need for new employment or additional employment for some people? You're going to need more manpower?
Now, I want to make sure I'm understanding your question. If there's a need for...
If, just in case, with the new fleet of trucks that you have, and you're going to have someone to operate those trucks, and especially if something does happen with Red River, will there be a responsibility to hire new people?
Thank you, Council Lady. I'm Scott Potter, Director of Metro Water. We're doing an operations audit of the entire waste services function, and we're going to bring a bunch of options before the council in a form of RFP to extend Metro's involvement, decrease Metro's involvement. We're going to do our best to avoid the eggs in one basket approach, but we're in no position at this point to tell y'all what our intentions are once the Red River contract expires.
So that's information you'll be presenting to us after you've
Yes, ma'am.
finished this investigation. Thank you. Good question. Any other questions on this one? Councilmember Suara, that's right.
I think as we're discussing, something came to mind, and I'm going to need Miss Mary Jo maybe either to send or to tell us specifically what these funds are to be used for. So for the ones that I know, that I'm familiar with, it has to do with responding to mitigating, planning ahead as it relates to COVID, and making sure that we're in a place where we don't find ourselves stuck again. So, but as I look at Metro Service Waters and some of the conversation that has happened, I know that there's a language added in there that says avoid public health issues, and I think maybe we want to tie it that way. But I'm just very concerned with some of the stuff that we've discussed, to just make sure that we're looking at the allowable activities under that grants, that we are very intentional and making sure that all of this stuff fits into one of the allowable things that we can do with it. So I just, it's just something that just came to mind, that I'm really now wondering whether we're expanding the scope a whole lot too much.
Ms. Wiggins.
Thank you, Chair. Real quickly, your 5 categories are supporting public health expenditures, addressing negative economic impacts caused by the health emergency, replacing lost sector public revenue, providing premium pay for essential workers, and investing in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. Those are really high level, but the majority of what we've been providing and funding so far is addressing the public health emergency, or addressing, in some cases, we've been addressing the negative economic impact. But renting these trucks, we could say, because we can't, it would be a public health emergency to have this garbage piling up. We have to be able to make these. So it falls under that category. We do have the fallback of providing government services to the extent of lost revenue. So as I mentioned earlier, we have $216 million in just our first year that we've already certified as lost revenue. So if we had to, if somebody says, I don't really think that, the trash is a public health emergency, I think it is, but we always have that fallback of that lost revenue in providing government services.
Councilmember Suarez.
Sorry, Chair. I just went on. I guess the safety net is that loss reimbursement, that we know that at the end of the day, if something is thrown out, we can always say it's part of our money that we got back from the lost revenue. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? We recommend approval. Thank you for answering all our questions. We appreciate Mr. Honeysucker and Mr. Potter. 8 in favor, 0 against. Now we have 5 resolutions on consent agenda. RS 2021-1265, 1266, 1267, 1268, and 1269. Do any of those need to be taken off consent? Bless you. All right, I will read the captions very quickly and we'll vote on them all at once. RS 2021-1265 approves an amendment to an intergovernmental agreement between the Tennessee Department of Health and Metro Board of Health to provide child fatality review services in the sudden death of the young and children under age 19 investigated by the Medical Examiner's Office. RS 2021-1266 approves a child and adult care food grant program from the Tennessee Department of Human Services to Metro Parks and Recreation to provide nutritious meals and snacks for children attending after-school programs in 9 park locations. RS 2021-1267 approves an in-kind grant from the Friends of Warner Parks to the Metro Board of Parks and Recreation to provide funding for the next phase of improvements in the Warner Parks. RS 2021-1268 approves an amendment to a grant from the Friends of Mill Ridge Park to the Metro Board of Parks and Recreation for the construction of a primitive trailhead at Mill Ridge Park. RS 2021-1269 authorizes the Metro Department of Law to compromise and settle the personal injury claim of Linda Patton against the Metro government in the amount of $54,010. Do you have a motion for the consent agenda? And a second. It's been moved and seconded. Any questions on the consent agenda? All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, we recommend 8 in favor, 0 against. We are 2 bills on second reading. First up is BL 2021-912, sponsors Allen, O'Connell, Suara, Porterfield, Welsh, Bradford, Toombs, and Stiles. This amends the Metro Code to create a mechanism for the implementation of the Inclusionary Housing Incentive Program. I would like to make a motion to defer that to February 1. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? All right, we recommend deferral, 8 in favor, 0 against. Next is our BL 2021-1013, sponsors Van Reese, Allen, Withers, and Lee. This approves a lease agreement between the Metro Board of Education and Liberty Collegiate Academy. I have a letter from the sponsor to approve. This was deferred in other committees. Do I have a motion? What did you move, Councilmember Mendez?
Can I ask just a clarifying question first? was the deferral in another committee going to cause deferral by rule tomorrow? If that's going to happen, then I guess I'll move the same, defer one meeting.
Defer one meeting.
Can we just do this together with the next couple if they're going to be the same
One
thing?
was deferred for 2 meetings.
All right, never mind.
yeah, I was just
So move to
going
defer one meeting.
15 and 15 together.
Okay, we can do 13 and 15? And 15, those were both deferred one meeting. If you would like to do those two together. All right, BL 2021-1015 approves the lease agreement between the Metro Board of Education and Nashville Prep. Both of those were deferred one meeting, so there's a motion to defer one meeting for those two. Any discussion on a one meeting deferral? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? All right, we recommend one meeting deferral, 8 in favor, 0 against. Next is RS 2021-1014, sponsor Sledge, Allen, Withers, and Lee, approves the lease agreement between the Metro Board of Education and Cambridge College Prep. Councilmember Sledge.
Thank you. I'd move to defer 2 meetings.
Do I have a second? It's been moved and seconded, 2 meeting deferral. Any discussion? Councilmember Suara.
Thank you, Chair. If someone will just go over why the conversation in the other committee that we're not privy to as to why the deferral was sought, because I do have some other questions, and I don't know if those were the reason why they were deferred. Just a summary will suffice.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Sledge.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Suarez. So for this one in particular, this facility hosts both a middle school and a high school. It's a zoned charter regarding the middle school, Cameron College Prep, but also Lead Academy meets there. This facility has about 17 portables on it right now. And Cameron High School was, I think it was the second black high school in Nashville, but in regard, it's a historic building. It is just a cornerstone of the community. And I know that Cameron alumni from the high school in the past are really proud of the high school being there again, but we got a facilities issue with all the portables on the site. They are crammed in. So wanted to give this 2 meeting deferral so we can talk through what we're going to do from a facility planning perspective there.
Thank you. And I would ask council members if it's helpful to send questions through Hannah to Metro Schools, and we can try to get all that consolidated on the budget website. That may be a helpful way to gather some of that information that people are asking. Other questions on the 2 meeting deferral? Seeing none, all those in favor of 2 meeting deferral, say aye. Any opposed? You recommend 2 meeting deferral, 8 in favor, 0 against. Finally, RS 2021-1018 sponsors Allen, Evans, Gamble, and Porterfield, approves an agreement between Lights On and Metro Nashville Police Department that provides bulb repair vouchers that officers may distribute to a targeted area in lieu of traffic tickets. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? You recommend approvals, 8 in favor, 0 against. We are adjourned. Good job.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.